In this video, we're going to take a look at the MIDI editor in Ableton Live. If you're using a different software program, you probably have all the same features. They might just be located in different spots or have different buttons or whatever. So just adapt it to your needs. But here is the MIDI editor, and I can resize it by dragging it up. Now, to get there, if you don't have anything in your session, you're going to need a MIDI clip. And so if you double click in a clip slot, you will get a blank MIDI editor. You can change the length of your MIDI clip. It defaults to 1 bar, but you can go here and change the length to whatever you want. For instance, now this is a 4-bar loop. If I go up to my grand piano where I already have MIDI, you can see that this MIDI clip is 8 bars long. All right, and so it's populated with MIDI notes. They're on a grid. You can see the grid lines in the background, and you can change those grid lines. So if I right click on my grid and I zoom in down here, you can see this. There are different grid settings, right? First of all, I can enable or disable snap to grid. I usually keep it on, especially for like electronic stuff, but you might want to take it off sometimes. This is set to be an adaptive grid. So what that means is that as I zoom in and zoom out, the grid lines will change. Let's switch it over to a fixed grid, and I'm going to switch it to a quarter note grid. All right, and you can see that some of the grid lines went away. Now, each one of these grid rectangles represents 1 quarter note. So this is a bar, and this is beat 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see that these notes are worth 2 beats. If you were comparing this to normal sheet music, you would say that these are half notes. These bars up here, these notes are 2 bars long. And so there's different ways of looking at rhythm with this MIDI grid. Let's change this to 16th notes, and you can see the grid got a lot more denser, right? It's finer gradations of rhythm, and now these are 16th notes. If you took band or orchestra or something, you might have counted these as like 1 E and 2 E and so on and so forth. But this is just to show you that you can resize the grid by right-clicking. Now let's look at that adaptive grid. I usually set my adaptive grid to narrow, and now if I zoom in, more grid lines will appear, right? Because it's adapting to my zoom level. To zoom in, I'm going to put my cursor up in between my bar and beat numbers here, and I'm just going to click and drag down, and you can see more and finer gradations of the grid are coming through. There's a limit, but you're not going to reach it. I mean, unless you're doing something pretty out there. You can set the adaptive grid to be wide or widest, just however many grid lines you need to work with, that's where you're going to set it. I recommend setting it to either narrow or 16th notes. 16th notes are the smallest value you're going to go to most of the time, unless you're doing like trap hi-hats or something. And then it's also worth noting that you can change this to a triplet grid by clicking here or using Command 3. And now we have triplets, groups of 3 for our grid. So I'm going to turn that off for now. Another big feature of the MIDI editor is this keyboard along the side here. And so if I look at this, this is laid out just like the piano keyboard. And if you didn't see the previous video on the notes of the piano keyboard, you really do need to know the notes of the piano keyboard. Now, Ableton will help you out here, right, by giving you the names as you hover across them. But still, it's just a baller move to know the names of the piano keyboard. This has a cool feature now, which is relatively new for Ableton. If you right click on the piano keyboard, you can change your default accidentals, that's what these are called, from sharps to flats or sharps and flats. So I'm going to go with flats here. And now when I hover over a black key, it shows me the flat name for it, right? And if I zoom in, which I can do by clicking and dragging to the right here, you'll see that this note has the name E flat. If I change it to sharps, it's D sharp, right? Same note, D sharp and E flat, same pitch. And then if I change it to sharps and flats, it shows me both names, D sharp / E flat. And this is a great way to sort of get those inharmonic notes in your head. We're going to talk about enharmonics in a later video. For now, I'm just going to leave this as flats. Another important characteristic of the Ableton Live MIDI editor is this MIDI note preview button. It's got a little set of headphones and a blue field there. Now, if this is turned off, if I enter a note, right, I'm just going to double click and have that note there, you can't hear it, all right? Or if I move a note and select a note, you're not hearing that. But if I turn the headphones on, now you'll hear it. All right, or if I type a note in, you can hear it. So that's something to keep in mind. You probably want to have this button enabled most of the time. Some other buttons that are very helpful here in the MIDI editor include the fold, scale, and highlight scale buttons. So you can set the scale of your session up here. You can pick a bass note like C or D or F or whatever, and then a quality, major, minor, Dorian, Mixolydian. There's a bunch of different qualities. You don't have to know what all of them are right now, but don't be afraid to experiment. They're pretty cool. So I'm going to go with minor, C minor. And if we look over here, I can press the highlight scale button. Well, first of all, before I even press that, all of the notes that are in the C minor scale are lit up in purple. And notes that are not in the C minor scale, like this B natural, are not lit up in purple. If I click highlight scale, it extends that purple highlight across the entire MIDI editor. And this, you can see if notes are in key or not. For instance, this chord right here, this F major chord, it's got F and A and C. F and C are both in the key, but A natural is not. The key of C minor has A flat. So it's just showing me that it's out of the key, but it still sounds good. Just because something is out of the key does not mean it won't sound good. Sometimes the coolest things sound great because they're out of key. I can go even further and fold the scale. Now, what that does is that actually hides the pitches that are not in the scale, right? Unless you're using them. So it didn't hide this A3 because I'm using it, but it did hide all the other notes that I'm not using that are not part of the scale. All right. So you can fold by scale, you can highlight scale, and then you can just regular fold the MIDI clip. When you fold, it's only showing you notes that you are using. So it's hiding all the other notes. This is very handy when you have a really tall clip. Like if you have octaves, or if you have just a massive chord, or, you know, a long melody, and, you know, there's a lot of reasons you would want to fold this down. Just know that, you know, if you're going to transpose or move notes around, you might want to have to unfold it. For instance, if I want to go from G to G sharp, or A flat, I guess in this case, I can do that, right? But if I fold it, I can't. It's only going to let me go to A because I'm not using A flat in this yet. So if I want to change it to A flat, I would have to unfold it first. The last button up here that's pretty cool is this magnifying glass. And you can do a bunch of things with this. This is a search function. You can search for all the Fs, for instance, and it'll, you know, show you that. It will allow you to search for all kinds of things. Chance operations, conditions, durations, all kinds of things. We're not going to get into this search feature too much in this course. That's a little beyond the scope, but definitely don't be afraid to experiment with it. At the bottom of the MIDI editor is this velocity editor. And it may or may not be there. If it's not there, you can click this button to reveal it. And you may have to choose what you want to show in the lane, either velocity, release velocity, or chance. These are a little more complicated for our purposes, so we're going to stick with velocity. And velocity is how hard you press the note. Now, all of these notes were typed in on the MIDI keyboard and then adjusted, so they're all the same. Most of them are either 100 or 74. Velocity values go between 0 and 127. 0 is like totally silent, like you're not going to hear it. 127 is the loudest, hardest you can go with that note or that parameter or whatever it is. So if I take a note like this F and I raise the velocity, it's going to get louder. And if I lower it, it's going to get softer. The color also changes. Notice how the F is a darker shade of that, like pink or whatever. If I bring it all the way up, it's very bright now. So velocity can be controlled and edited in this velocity lane, and you can sort of shrink it or raise it as needed. And those are the basic features of the MIDI editor.